I would like to talk about animals in general and maybe connect that to a couple of other topics. But first of all, like in Buddhism, animals are considered a lower realm of existence, which is easy to see because we have those extra mental capacities that animals don't have in general, even though again science doesn't know so much about many species, even if they study them, but the way science studies now is not very objective and it's very human-centered. That's why again they are very limited in the way they can understand or conceive some things, especially with some very different species like insects or some hybrid species which can operate with different sensory perceptions that humans are not aware of. But if you become a deep meditator, you can actually become aware of these things. But in general, we can say that the main thing is that animals don't have that much the capacity of self-reflection and ultimately reflection on life or the meaning of life or the purpose of them being here or existence, which humans do. And unfortunately, as anyone can witness in general, for humans, for most of them, that extra capacity becomes an issue actually. And just the same as in some tricky situation when somebody wants to make another human suffer, they can exactly add to a basic physical pain the psychological suffering and pain, torture, exactly paying on that part that the humans have, which is to have the ability to self-reflect and project and imagine. And that's the way, unfortunately, as I've written a long time ago, a quote that humans have that extra capacity also, unfortunately, as far as becoming liars and manipulators towards each other, which animals don't really have like that. Sometimes they like to trick themselves. I mean, you can see how cats like to play with each other sometimes, but it is still pretty much in a more straightforward way than humans enjoy and think of themselves as smart when they can become really cunning towards each other. Or, again, for the sense of power and control over another one, then they like to use that sadistic or torturing aspect of the human brain capacities and using psychology to trick and pretend and to make other people imagine really bad things about themselves, while animals don't have that. They are, of course, much more direct and raw in their behavior. It's more like direct aggression if they want to be bad. But unfortunately, also that's one aspect where humans, and especially the ones who actually think they care about animals, and especially when they have pets, that they think they are part of the family or their friends, their pets, they still actually use that, unfortunately. Yeah. And they like that only because unconsciously they know that they are supposed to be the boss and they have control, they are the dominant one, and that the animal will pretty much, abide and obey and do whatever they like whenever they like. So that like implicit hierarchy is what unconsciously make humans comfortable, especially when they acquire animals as pet toys to, again, feel a lack or, compensate some kind of trauma or whatever. And again, anybody feels is good. Oh yeah, get a pet, get a dog, get a cat because you have this and that and that. And even though after they can pretend they are family, friend, because they help them cope with whatever issue they have as human, actually the start point is still to use another being in a very selfish, very self-centered purpose, and consider animals as a commodity. And that's why nowadays, of course, especially in the American culture, as degenerate as it is, now it has become so popular with service dogs, right? And now they allow them more and more in all kind of situation. And and people, as you could see, of course, as a degenerate culture, it has derived so far that many people use the excuse of saying that these dogs are service dogs, so they can push further and further the rules or the limits. But in one way, animals are what they are in all the kind of beings in the world that exist. But the point is more about the relationship between humans and animals. And one side is that aspect of pets and how, again, people unconsciously don't realize that they still consider those other sentient beings who do the best they can with what the means they have as animals. They actually abuse them in a very self-centered way, in the start point of why they actually want to have pets or to have animals or to deal with them. Even many people who rescue animals are still on the same basis. And in one way, one aspect I wanted to touch about in a different field is also the difference between raising kids and animals, and the credit animals deserve for the huge capacity of adaptability to the humans, the human owners, and the madness, both mental issues, as most humans have, and they still project that on the animal, the pets, but also how it is taken for granted, again, that an animal which she is actually completely taken out of their own original context in which they should live. No animal is meant originally to live in a house in the comfort of a human lifestyle. Within all those furnitures and inside that that building. And of course, and to confirm how it is easy to sway around, and as the good Pavlovian way shows, that you can very easily trick an animal, just as humans are for the very weak mind side. Anyone falls so easily for the comfort and convenience of life and existence. But at the end, of course, comfort and convenience doesn't have any real positive outcome at the end for both the body and the brain. And for animals, it's kind of worse. But of course, any animal, once they get to experience more comfort as their simpler mind works, they will fall for it at once. And after that, they will become addicted at once, and then they will demand it, of course, all the time for more comfort, convenience. The same with treats. And of course, again, humans, sadly, think it's cool to use the system of treats to corrupt totally the mind of the animal. But then on the other hand, animals originally with only so many capacities, physical or mental, let's say, it's so amazing that they actually can adapt so well to whatever the humans make them put up with. And especially with changes, right? Again, life is constant change, and many humans don't like much the change in their life because they have developed habit patterns. And that's what they are addicted to, and that's where the comfort zone is. Again, comfort and convenience, and they don't like to change so much. But then, suddenly when you create a change in your life, which brings stress often, then it is forgotten in one way and taken for granted on the other side that the animal, the pet, will just follow and just adapt, and that's it. And in that sense, it's quite amazing the capacity of adaptation of animals or pets mainly, as far as the classic one, dogs, cats, horses. You know, horses getting carried around anyway in trucks or planes, crazy. They are not meant for that for sure, but anyway. And then actually humans don't have at all such capacity to adapt per se. I mean, they will ultimately, but it will be like going through, like some people say, a lot of trauma or stress and anxiety, and it will be just a big deal. And I mean, they create the change themselves like that in their life. And then at the same time, they just forget quite a bit that for an animal, this is a very different environment and not what they are meant for originally. Yet, just because as a pet they really enjoy their owner usually, and they try their best, especially the dogs, I mean, they will try to adapt as quick as they can, you know, to satisfy the owner. And that's crazy in one way, that it is assumed that that's just the way it is, compared to how humans make it difficult. If you ask somebody to change their habit, then you are facing usually a lot of resistance or grudge also after and all that. But that's touching on one side of observation too, and in one way parenting and how people raise their kids nowadays. And that's why the new generation is so useless, because over time people have been more and more spoon-fed everything, and you're just given knowledge, education, right? Especially the generation when now they had pushed for all the intellectual fields at school and forgot totally about the practical fields of life, the real useful topics in life. And so everything is intellectual, but nowadays the new generation is all about that, right? It's all about intellectual and playing with device. Sure, they have the skills to adapt quick to play with devices, technological devices, but they have zero ability to deal with real life matters and real life things. And what has happened is that they have canceled that main ability of observation, objective observation, and to accept, to learn through your own observation. Everything has to be mashed and spoon-fed to the people. They have lost the proper learning ability, which animals still have, and you can see, and it's pretty amazing sometimes, by observing, because that's the way they raise their own offspring in animal world, right? They don't have so much vocabulary as we do as human to teach their offspring this and that and that. They don't try to explain so much. They show, and you learn by observing. And so because you learn by observing and ultimately try to recreate yourself, then you experience it from within again. You experience yourself. That's the proper way of learning things, right? And that has been known as what creates a degenerate generation too, or useless generation actually, in that sense, that of course, especially nowadays, kids have no sense of observation, like objective observation to learn. They don't dare to try to put in practice and to fail, right? Because it doesn't look cool, right? Compared to others. And so the brain become more and more limited like that as far as the capacity of adaptation for oneself. And ultimately, again, it makes those kind of kids that actually, have completely tolerant, right? The whole thing of tolerance, and try to be supportive, especially from the North American culture, but supportive to degenerations is not helping anybody, and supportive to uselessness and erasing the capacity of self-learning is not helping anyone for later in life, for real life things, obviously. But at the end, so people don't know the basic learning experience and process of observing, trying to understand, trying to recreate. Failing is okay, and then really start to master yourself properly, concretely, instead of just being taught kind of intellectually by words, some things, and maybe remember. But again, the reality is right there. So actually, that's the way animals are. And for me, originally, I thought if I had kids, of course, there is the whole thing of parents not wanting to listen about parenting from people who don't have kids, even though sometimes it's very easy to observe some common patterns out there. Anyway, it's just observation, exactly. And the conclusions are easy to draw from what one sees around as a general pattern. But observation, as we mean also, like in Buddhism, in the practice of meditation, it's back to that same thing, to have a sense of objective observation of how things are, and try to figure and understand like that, and not just being taught. Like people like to listen. Of course, nowadays, it's like, oh no, I prefer to listen to audiobooks, so I don't have to read anymore, or I don't have to think for myself, right? Again, lessening the brain capacities and the development or developmental aspect of the brain in different areas to get everything the easiest, laziest way, which is develop, of course, the neurotic mind or sclerosis. And less and less brain capacities, which again has seen now in the new type of scientist, as I referred to earlier, those scientists who have less and less ability to observe properly and relate properly, again by opening the mind into understanding how the other being is, instead of projecting really the limited human way of looking at things. And that's what I've used that words a lot before, about how, unfortunately, again, people actually try to humanize their pets, which is, again, one of the worst things you can do to an animal. I think I have a quote on that, but the whole idea of projecting human ways of thinking, human emotions onto animals. And now that's the problem nowadays, as we see again. Unfortunately, the whole degenerate side of humans in general, who are addicted to social media and posting on social media to get attention, to get likes or whatever, sadly, and now they involve their pets, and we can see how they actually, again, put their pets in situation or force them to do things that are so unnatural for an animal or for that kind of species. But yet, again, those so-called owners who pretend to care about the animal, no, exactly, it has become a commodity to support the very egoistic way of being and the need for attention of the owner. So they use the pet for that. Well, I'm not going to even mention, just because I saw a short video again yesterday on police dogs or army dogs, and then again how degenerated the American culture has become, because they're the worst that way, of course, with the whole military thing and military heroes, and how when one dog has died in the field of battle, and they have a funeral and they say, oh, that dog served really well his country. I mean, that's the extreme exactly of madness, human madness, compared to animals. But again, and I'm sure the owner of the dog felt that, his dog was meant for that, to be a good soldier and served his country. Anyway, that's complete insanity, right? To a level that indescribable. But still, exactly in that sense, and nowadays, for the sake of attention and to confirm how people are so self-centered, and they use the pets for that, to satisfy to their own pleasure, their own leisure, and to satisfy to the power tripping aspect, which most humans still have. Otherwise, you would let animals be for what they are, and in their own environment, to respect the laws of nature, if you really understood what's healthy for them. But yeah, I mean, many people could say, yes, I had my dog until the end of their life. They enjoyed their life in the house with the comfort and convenience, sure. But it's not helping the dog, actually, ultimately, karmically. That's how it will make animals remain animals, and not being able to climb up the ladder of the plane of existence to get done, and rather the opposite way. And that makes those people go lower in the realm of existence, but again, something too far-fetched for most people to care about anyway, so that's okay. But again, that's why the world is becoming what it is, and there's still more and more animals suffering around. And as we know, it is said that, how many species have been destroyed the last 50 years. Now they say 50 or 60% of the wildlife has disappeared the last 60 years. There's 50 years, there's a reason for that. And still, yes, we see more and more madness around pets and animals and animal abuse. And then there is another side. There's a famous quote from Leonardo da Vinci that says, truly man is the king of beasts, because his brutality surpasses them. And yes, exactly as I meant earlier, the human mind, with its extra capacities around the emotional aspects, can be, unfortunately for a majority, twisted around in in the wrong direction, let's say in the bad direction, and to use to harm, basically, to torture, to take advantage, to use and abuse and harm. And again, I'm not going to go back to the vegetarian vegan diet versus the other one. I have made an audio about that, but that's exactly the point also. I mean, if you have pets, if you say that you like animals but you eat them, you're a total hypocrite. The same as the hypocrisy that I find is pretty amazing too about being a veterinarian. And when a vet tells me, yeah, I'm a vet, but yeah, I don't mind eating meat. Well, okay, sure. Then that's okay. There's not much to say about that except that to witness what it is for what it is. And that's why this world is still violent and more violent anyway, at every level. And all the people who actually keep eating animals are part of it and contribute to that, support that for sure. The whole violent energy around. Just like Da Vinci, I had made a more straightforward quote on being vegan. And if you eat meat, then you support a violent energy around the world for the killing of other beings. To accept or support the killing of other sentient beings is exactly being part of that. There's no question about it, no matter how much you try to justify whatever. But then what I want to touch upon is the other side, unfortunately, again, of those humans who think that they are smart, but they become scientists, researchers. Unfortunately, yesterday I watched again a little documentary on, I mean, not unfortunately, but this man like Harry Harlow, who did that experiment on monkeys to study the social interaction and how to deprive, I mean, exactly to try to study in one way and as usual draw like straight out stupid conclusions, as many scientists have done, to transfer animals to human conclusions from the experiment. But and again, crazy enough that back then, animals were such commodities as they are still, especially like monkeys and all these animals that are bred just for the sake of being tortured and murdered, and it's all legal, right? There's no problem. So no wonder why the world is becoming more violent, because this is accepted, and most of the people accept that anyway. And I won't go too much on the makeup side of things for that, but still this is a big part of it. Again, anyone who enjoys the makeup for what it is, makeup, dyed hair, and painted nails, all that, even the ones who pretend, no, I use vegan products, non-testing on animals, you totally support an industry that's all about torturing, murdering other sentient beings for the sake of vanity and narcissism, which are the most unnecessary values as a human, if you are an evolved human. So again, you are very selfish and self-centered that way, and you have the very sadistic Nazi mindset in you supporting that. But then the whole thing around science and research and scientists, so supposedly, I guess that's why it started for me a long time ago. I would have to say thanks to Brigitte Bardot back then, as she became famous right from kind of quitting the life in the limelight as a movie star, singer, celebrity, to the sake of wanting to, good towards animals and rescue and take care of animals. As much as, again, she did what she could where she was. A lot of things were, of course, not perfect, but she wasn't aware of a few things, but still. And then, anyway, she created those documentaries. She became famous for first starting to come up with those videos on culling and killing of baby seals in Canada for the white fur. And then, thanks to her, basically, a few documentaries started to show what is done is what is called a medical research lab, right? Again, that is the legal thing, and I wonder how many of those so-called scientists, researchers in those medical research labs have consciously and unconsciously that very strong sadistic impulses that get satisfied legally to experiment on all those kind of animals. But just like Harry Harlow said at the end of his life, as a disturbed person, again, who had a disturbed childhood, let's say, which developed certain psychological pattern, which he transferred into his experiment towards monkeys. So one guy who didn't have a very good, like a very loving upbringing with his parents, and also fell into depression later in life, well, his experiments were about that, studying how young beings are dependent on the connection to their parents or mother, and how they evolve if they are cut off from any social interaction, especially with their parents early on, and isolation. So of course he pushed very far his experiment on that with the monkeys. So isolated babies at once from their mothers and create like man-made fake substitute mothers and see how they were interacting with that. But ultimately, that whole madness of the human approach to the animal kingdom, to the environment, and trying to understand it. So in general, I mean that humans are so ignorant, yet full of themselves, as thinking they know, and especially after they have a few degrees from college, universities, out of that they think they know, like that biologists. Just as at the time we made there were some comments again from actually some farmers or people who are used to live in the bush, like in the wilderness, or used to deal with nature, and they see those so-called scientists, freshly certified by the degree from the bench of university or college, who came out in nature with the intellectual knowledge and start to tell those guys that this should be done like this and like this, while having no clue of how it is to live in nature and interact with nature and wildlife, and actually being quite freaked out or unable to deal with it. But the intellect, the big ego is there to say, but this is what we should do and implement, and how we should do things in nature, while themselves not being able to live in nature or interact with wildlife. But then in general, I would say that the very big ignorance, stupidity of scientists that way is again the very basic brutal attitude of studying nature. They don't know better than discovering any life or organism and beings and just kill them, to dissect them, to study them, or track them, or put this and that on them. And that's such a very basic, immature way of studying, while of course disturbing them. Again, if it was strict observation that was not disturbing them, then that would be the one right way, that way. But the whole thing again of scientists using that excuse most of the time, that they have to still take some lives, they have to kill to study the physiology, the anatomy, and try to understand the behaviors. That is such a very primitive approach to studying life actually. While again, if you are a meditator and you go within deep enough yourself, you will actually understand properly life in general and how everything works around. And that's the proper way again, because it's objective, because you study yourself properly as a proper scientist with detachment, but you observe objectively within yourself, then you will understand a lot about life, existence, being an organic being, and the interaction with energy around at every level. And you, after that, actually would understand a lot of what you see outside. You understand how it works. You just observe, you look, and you understand. Eckhart Tolle touches on that too, actually. So you don't need to go out there to destroy the environment and to kill and torture other beings to understand supposedly better how they work, how they live, and nature and environment. If you actually decided to become a real intelligent human being, which means to become a deep meditator and develop an objective sense of observation that leads to wisdom, then after that, naturally that will apply to your surroundings, to the environment around you, and then you see things for what they are and understands from within actually as you relate to, because part of you as a human being, an organic being, you can relate to all that. But that takes that intelligence, and then you understand at once and fully, so you don't need to supposedly create all those experiments and recreate them and repeat them, and for that to torture and kill so many millions and millions of animals every year, just like it is done in the labs. And in that way, I will push further and bring in a notion that is probably too much for many people, and that could make some people not think so much about me anymore. But in that sense, and again, like it is actually touched upon a little bit in that movie that I referred to many times, which is called The Green Beautiful, A Beautiful Green, that French comedy for people who live and have developed a higher intelligent human civilization, and which is all about that, the extra capacities that humans can develop through meditation and practices like this, and all about energy and spirituality while respecting nature and the environment and living in harmony with it. But there is that notion that I mean, we know the medical science, and lately with COVID, and it has been exposed that Fauci exactly as a perfect example of a very sadistic, like Nazi-minded doctor who likes to experiment on beings and ultimately probably enjoy the sadistic aspect of things, of making those other beings suffer, as he created, of course, the COVID virus for what it is, with the intention that they had, but also then it came up to light that, you know, he was carrying those experiments where they have those dogs tied up, of course, the whole notion of tying up another being, and then, you know, infect them with parasites, and which is, you know, one of the worst kind of suffering, painful suffering, and then as opposed to mental suffering that other experiments are done, which are also really bad, but and until they die, right? So with those dogs, and those are so-called doctors, and they're called researchers, but they are very primitively minded, exactly with that kind of Nazi sadistic mindset that doesn't care for life at all, and they are very desensitized that way, right? Just like a good Nazi doctor was, right? When they use that other being as a commodity to satisfy to their research mind and experimentation. And so the medical science on that, many people would say, well, still we are happy to have the medical science research because it has developed so many cures, so many things, whatever, for disease. But that's again the very limited primitive mind approach, and which is not like a real Buddhist way. If you are a true Buddhist at the end and you understand the point and the purpose of life, existence, how it works, that we are all born to die anyway, and it's all about reincarnations and how one evolves through one life and life after life, karmically, then you become not so attached to that physical body life experience, rather the mental attitude and the mindset. And ultimately, again, one should learn to live in harmony and in accordance to the laws of nature, and knows that nature, the Dharma, the law of the universe, know better because you are part of it. You don't control them, of course. You don't fight against nature, again, as many scientists do. So you can live in accordance to the laws of nature and accept that reality for what it is. And all the time, nature is not perfect. That's why it keeps evolving. So it will create imperfect beings all the time, yes. And some beings are meant to not survive anyway, that way. And that's just how it is. It's just like a lottery. But the humans have developed such a most extreme self-centered sense, egoistic sense of self, which is that illusion, such a narcissism that, and they pretend that every individual life is important. At the same time as they think it's okay to discard any other life on the planet, or that any other life is there to be used or to serve them one way or the other. And that's why it has created that huge imbalance in the world now. And again, that's why there's more and more violence, and it's going down the drain very soon, because this is against nature. Nature, yes, doesn't care about individuality. It produces all the beings, billions by billions most of the time. So yes, in one way you're just a number in that sense, but in the law of nature, yeah, because if you don't have ego, you can accept that. You can understand that if you don't have any ego. As soon as you have your ego and me, then suddenly you want to be so important, and your life is supposed to be so important that way. But actually, if people had accepted to live by nature's rules and nature's laws, and accept that as a random lottery, that sometimes beings are not meant to survive or they have problems, and to accept that, and instead of fighting against nature, which is interesting because, again, most of the humans, when they see an animal suffering or dying quick or not quick, as a typical situation, especially with the smaller ones, insects, right, which have a short lifespan, they just accept it, right? Oh, that's just nature, right? This animal, of course, got this, got that disease, got that thing, suffer a little bit and die. It's just normal. And then to the point that humans decide, again, those so-called researchers and scientists, they start to decide which animals have the right to live or not, or how many of these kind of animals can live there or not, and then the rest we need to suppress them, to kill them. So for all other beings, all other animals on Earth, humans assume that they have the right to decide which one can live or not, how much, how many, there or there, and we can just kill them. But then as soon as it's about the human themselves, an individual as a human, then suddenly, no, that doesn't apply. It's totally different. This is part of the deep madness and insanity of the mankind on this planet. And in that sense, going totally against nature, creating that huge imbalance with nature and environment. But then, back to that medical research aspect of things, ultimately that is to say that that's contributed to the bad collective karma for mankind to use and abuse and torture and murder so many millions of animals in the sake of research, medical research, to develop cures for whatever, instead of humans curing themselves through the proper practice of becoming intelligent beings, intelligent human beings, developed, evolved properly human beings through introspection, through discovering your true nature, through meditation, and how you actually exist and interact with your environment, and that everything is energy, but then you start to become a master of that energy. And then you can understand properly how to be healthy, a healthy being, and becoming a wise being. But we could, and then that's just accepting what is known as the natural selection. But again, humans, because of the total selfishness, self-centeredness, and egoistical way of being, they can't accept that notion of natural selection, as it doesn't care to any individual, any ego, but it's just about the mass, and within the mass there's always a few percent that are not good, in good shape, and gonna not make it, or gonna suffer a lot more. But that's just the way it is. That's just the reality of any existence, any phenomena. So humans spend their time fighting against nature, and they pretend to do research in a very primitive minded way, which is very violent, very brutal, and in a fighting mode against nature, but the reality of life and existence, which is why it's going worse and worse at every level. And ultimately, there shouldn't be any research as such against animals, instead of respecting their life and observing objectively from an intelligent point of view, as an intelligent human, just observing the world, the environment, the animals, one would understand and would really understand how one relates to all that as being part of it. Again, there is that famous little drawing online where there is the eco world, where there is all these kind of beings and plants and everything on Earth, all together as a circle, part of a cycle. And then there is the ego world, which is the human ego-centered world, where the human is at the center, and human think that they have the rest is there to serve them. That's where also that there is that crazy religious notion of those basic, religious people anyway, who like to say that God puts those animals to serve us. God put this on earth to serve us, right? The whole idea. That's again confirming the very deep mental issues of humans in general, and this kind of humans especially. But there it is. But the notion of using other beings either for company, either for supposedly helping your own personal issues, mental issues, which is not helping to solve them, because you just compensate as usual, just like finding pleasure or addiction in a drug or whatever, or alcohol to compensate your own issues, but not trying to solve them. Yeah, that just makes things going on and getting worse and worse that way. And using animals like that, supposedly for the good aspect of things, or using them in a totally abusive way, like completely desensitized way, they are just commodities to be used, tortured, murdered, carelessly. also, of course, will bring more and more of the bad karma, the very violent karma around. And that's the mentality of humans, again, being very ignorant and not understanding the purpose of life and existence and their own true nature, and so existing in a way that goes against nature, in constant fighting against nature mode, fighting against the environment, fighting against the universal laws and nature's laws. Of course, that brings that karma that's happening. And as some people once say, the climate change and the weather is there to remind you, with more and more natural catastrophes happening now for a reason, exactly to remind that, as I wrote also yesterday, humans cannot cheat life, they cannot cheat nature, but they try so much because they think so high of themselves. They think that they are so advanced now in science and research that they think they know so much. But of course, it's just making things worse and worse. But that mentality doesn't seem to change. So that's why, again, the more you can't admit wrong and the more you can't humble down, the worse and worse things become and the karma. But then otherwise, one can decide again to self themselves from that and become an intelligent human being, which means to respect nature for what it is, respect the environment, the other beings, and rather work on themselves properly and go into introspection, into meditation, and find out all the answers within and how suddenly one can relate properly and objectively with everything around and being in harmony and at peace, and bring that out actually to other beings or to the environment. When you become a deep meditator, have reached certain level and you start to master the energy within yourself, understand how it works, and the energetic interaction, constant interaction, of course, billions of times per second, reactions, exchanges with everything around the environment, even the unseen or the unseeable, then you can actually project some very, very positive outcome into your environment, onto other beings. And for you, it becomes a very peaceful state and harmonious state inside, knowing that you do no harm and only good, and respect properly the laws of nature, the universal law. That's what makes you in harmony with them. And by the way, of course, there is the agenda in place by the people controlling this world, same as I have mentioned before, but it's everywhere because it connects everything too, which is purposely to have tried and developed the means to erase that capacity of introspection and objective observation, to learn real life things and to respect one's environment and other beings, which we see again, of course, and especially the evolution lately. That's why it creates those generation of beings and younger beings, as David Suzuki also says in a quote, that if we don't develop in the children the sense of respect and harmony and live in tune with nature, they won't understand at all what nature is, and how could we expect them to respect it later on. That's exactly what the agenda has been about, which is exactly that. So that, as I mentioned before, erase the capacity of self-introspection to develop the real human capacities towards intelligence and wisdom, and also being desensitized completely towards the natural world and other beings, rather things, thinking that they are commodities to be used and abused, and it's okay to be totally desensitized that way, because you become so selfish and self-centered about your own pleasure, satisfaction, and now the big need for attention, the narcissism exacerbated through social media, and rather use other beings and nature to get attention through the postings. And as such, to have completely cancelled the ability of the younger generation to develop real life skills that adapt to real life world and life, and rather being told and spoon-fed everything and given, so they become dependent on the system and the assistance from the outside world and the leaders to control them and give them. So as we know nowadays, we can see the younger generation, how unskilled they are with some basic life abilities, and how to interact, to understand the real world things, as they are all about the devices and the attention they get on the media. That's pretty much the whole life, and that's what the system has created purposely. So they become totally dependent on the assistance and control from the leaders and the system, and completely desensitized to real life things, as they cannot see a real animal anymore, or if they go really in nature out there, then suddenly they become disgust, and also as they are discussed with blood and everything, like just real life things that people were used to as part of life indeed back then. But everything has been done to create that very fake, superficial world, detached from reality of life, nature, environment, to create humans who will exactly be more and more concentrated in cities, as they develop the notion of 15-minute cities now, and being only dependent on that, and only exist through that whole system, completely detached from the rest.